Okay, thank you everyone. As I said, this is our first panel of the day, and we're going to be talking net zero travel and tourism. Just make sure everyone's sat in the right seats. Yes, they are. Excellent. So as you can see, the panellists joining me today are Lyndon Koppel, Vice President Sustainability and ESG at MSC Cruises, Olivia Ruggles-Bryce, Vice President Sustainability at BCD Travel, and Nicole Sauter, Director Global Sustainability at American Express Global Business Travel. Please welcome your panel. Now, what we're going to do is, do you guys know each other, by the way? Have you met before?
I've met Olivia. We haven't met.
Okay, right. Sometimes it's good if you haven't met before, because then obviously you're talking about new conversations with new people, but the fact that you have is also a positive. I'm going to ask the first questions here, but really what we're trying to achieve is a bit of a conversation between our panellists and also you in the audience. So we do have a microphone that we will be bringing around at some stage. So if you have a question, once we actually get into the conversation, if you can please put your hand up and maybe keep it up as well, then I'll try and acknowledge you and we'll get the microphone over to you. Just that way we're not having long gaps with somebody running across the hall to bring you a microphone. So if you do have a question, please put your hand up and we'll try and get to you, time willing to sort that out. Okay, so first question, and I'll say if you can please introduce a bit more about yourself and about the organisation as well. So what steps is your company taking to reduce the carbon footprint of travel and tourism and achieving net zero?
Thanks, Scott. Well, I work for a cruise line, so we're obviously a key part of the travel and tourism industry, and hopefully we'll get to talk about the importance of collaboration and what we're doing to support the industry as a whole, but I think it would be remiss of me not to talk specifically about what we're doing within the cruise industry and what we're doing at MSC, particularly as yesterday we had the discussion about aviation and sustainable aviation fuel. That's obviously key towards. We're a very similar in terms of the fact that both aviation and the cruise industry are sectors that need to carry their own fuel. They're under a lot of pressure to decarbonise, and we're taking somewhat similar steps. I worked in aviation for many years, so I understand that world. We have a little bit more scope within maritime, arguably, because aviation is very much focused on an alternative liquid hydrocarbon fuel. We could potentially look at alternatives, and that's one part of our strategy. But if I can just kind of take that a step back, we're really focusing on three things. One is the kind of ship technology and design. One is energy efficiency and operational efficiency, and one is about the fuels. So design, we've made huge progress within the industry in terms of making it more efficient. Our ships now are about 50% better than their design requirements under the IMO. We're also about 40% better than a ship that was built 10 years ago, so huge strides, and that all helps. It's not going to get us to zero, we know that, but making sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce energy efficiency makes good sense when it comes to designing new ships, where the fuel we're going to use in the future may not have that same calorific value, so we need to carry more to go the same journey, so we'll need more bunkering or storage capacity. And also, we've got to bridge that cost gap, because this fuel is absolutely going to cost more, certainly initially, before it's really scaled up. So we need to account for that as well through that kind of whole, making sure that we're designing to be efficient. And then when it comes to the energy efficiency, when we used to design an itinerary, it was very much along the lines of what will sell the best. That was really all that was considered. Where can we go that it's going to sell to the people who want to go on the cruise? And then that data was sent to our tech team, who then had to work out how much fuel would be used. Now, through a project that was funded through the EU, we've come up with an itinerary optimization tool which allows us to take everything into account, including efficiency. So it might mean changing the order that we go places, how long we stay there. So all those kind of factors are now built into that tool. And also the ships are so much better now at collecting data throughout the whole ship. Remember, this is a floating hotel on top of a ship, so there's huge amounts of technology there that we've now got thousands of data sets throughout the ship that can feed back to our crew, and it's not just their responsibility anymore. We've got people on shore as well who are able to look at that data in real time and make continual adjustments. So all that is making a real difference when it comes to the kind of energy efficiency of the ship. But I do need to talk about the fuels, because obviously that's a really important aspect for us. We need to look for an alternative fuel in the same way that aviation does. We need to find a fuel that is fit for purpose. I think one of my frustrations, having been in aviation and now in shipping, is that we need to accept the fact that we've got to find solutions that are fit for purpose. You know, like we're looking at things like hydrogen, but then we're asking the question, is that really a good option for something that has to move in the deep sea environment where you've got to carry fairly large quantities of it? If you know how, you know it's got to be compressed, it's got to be kept at very low temperatures. All these kind of things are going to prove very logistically very difficult. So I'm a big supporter in looking for solutions, but I'm also supportive of looking to make sure that we're not using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. I mean, you need to find the right solution for the right vehicle. So we are looking at biofuels in the same way as aviation, and arguably should we only ring fence that type of fuel for aviation and shipping? Because if it's the best solution for them, should we leave others who are land-based to look for other solutions that may be slightly more difficult, but they're more doable for the land-based environment, especially if you're not having to travel those longer distances. So we're really trying to take that into account. So I think partly for us, it's making sure that we're getting those right fuels, but also sending the right messages out to policymakers, regulators. Let's find a fuel that's fit for purpose. And then, sorry, just the last thing I want to say, because again, having worked in aviation, one of the frustrations is the fact that we need to make sure that there's a level playing field. At the moment, we're seeing differences in the way that aviation and maritime is being treated in this whole net decarbonisation. I'll give you two examples. One is the aviation industry has very successfully managed to persuade the EU to ring fence the cost of 20 million EUA allowances, which currently are, I mean, the price has gone down, they're around 55, but they were up at 100. So we're talking potentially between 1 and 2 billion euros to bridge the cost gap between SAF and regular fuel. That means that a user can go and buy that SAF, but then they can claim up to 100% of that price gap. That's going to make a huge difference for that industry if that funds are available, and that's exactly where those funds need to be used. If you're going to raise funds through regulatory mechanisms, you need to make sure that they're put back into the industry. That's a really excellent example of how that is being used. We haven't got that yet. We've also got something called Fuel EU Maritime, which the onus is on us as the operator to reduce the energy intensity or the emissions intensity of that fuel. And we're going to get penalised quite heavily. That is really what's driving all the work we're doing on our road mapping and scenario planning. It's really the cost of these regulations. Aviation, Refuel EU, the onus is on the fuel supplier to provide that fuel. In maritime, the onus is on us as the user, not the fuel provider. So again, it's putting more pressure on us. So we're very supportive of a regulatory environment to drive these new fuels, but we want to make sure it's fair, equitable, level playing field, and that there is a level of appreciation for the unique challenges that we face as an industry.
Sure. Comprehensive first answer. That's what I like.
I'll shut up now.
Just to remind everyone, we do have other speakers available as well. Olivia, why don't you tell us more about BCD? And this is going to be it's a one-question panel. Tell us about the steps that you're taking to mitigate the carbon footprint and achieve net zero.
So BCD Travel is a corporate travel management company. And our motto is to travel smart and travel better. So we work with corporates to really maximise the value of their travel programmes. There's sort of two parts to our net zero journey. Within BCD Travel, we look at what we're doing as a company within our own operations, and then we look at how we help our customers to essentially reduce the carbon impact of their travel programs. So from the internal perspective, we have a science-based target. So we're working really hard to reduce the emissions by 35% by 2030 of our own operations. So we do a lot of work around our office estate. We have programs to become 100% renewable across those over the next few years. Is this turn? Is it on? Yes, it is. So we're doing a lot of work around how we can do that. We have a large remote workforce, so we have over 14,000 employees in around 40 countries around the world, and the vast majority of them are home-based. So a lot of work in terms of engaging our workforce in how they can become more energy efficient at home, essentially. And then on the customer side, and Lyndon already mentions the challenges around aviation, and unfortunately I couldn't be here yesterday, but I'm sorry to have missed that session. Aviation is the largest part of our customers' footprint when it comes to travel, so looking at how we work with them to really understand where the impacts are and how they can achieve most value in terms of emissions for their travel as well. So helping them identify which routes are most emitting routes and how they can take steps, perhaps by smart choice of airline or aircraft even, to reduce the impact of those routes, looking at things like reducing same-day travel, reducing number of colleagues that go perhaps on one trip or to one meeting, and then I'm sure we'll come to some more of the specifics later on. But that's essentially how we are tackling it. Obviously, sustainable aviation fuel is a huge element as well, but I'll leave that to Nicole to talk about. And then just one final thing, we're also really conscious that net zero very much focused on emissions, big challenge when it comes to aviation and travel, but actually there's a whole other dimension to this as well, and we don't want to solve one problem by creating others. So we're very careful always to look at the social elements of what we do, looking beyond carbon as well in the environmental sphere, looking at biodiversity, working with hotel companies on how we can make sure that the positive impacts of travel can be maximized as well.
Thank you, Olivia. Nicole?
Right, and similar but different. Amex GBT, we are a B2B travel and expense software services company, so similar story. We work with around 20,000 corporates worldwide, from multinational to SME, and we help them with the end-to-end management of their travel program. And that increasingly includes sustainability. And let me start with the bigger picture. Contrary to popular belief at the time, the pandemic hasn't killed business travel. It actually transformed business travel in many ways. What we see today, business travel is used as a driver of corporate culture, bringing the workforce together. And in many ways, it has actually created a renewed appreciation for in-person meetings, like coming together here today. But don't get me wrong, where Zoom, where hybrid can replace travel, create efficiencies, streamline things, that's great. We welcome that. But the Global Business Travel Association has predicted that this year, business travel spend will rebound fully to pre-pandemic levels 2 years earlier than expected. And at the same time, the climate isn't getting any cooler, quite the opposite. And our clients, ourselves, we are under increasing pressure to decarbonize. The Science Based Targets Initiative is a great proof point. I see their weekly roundups on LinkedIn, I follow it, and just to see the sheer number of corporations committing every week to set science-based targets and to achieve net zero in line with science is great. But if you look at the example of a professional services company, for many of them, business travel emissions, and specifically air travel emissions, tend to be one of the largest category in emissions overall for them to achieve net zero. So my message is that we must tackle that proactively. The issue isn't travel, the issue is carbon. We don't want that to be the elephant in the room. And so to answer the actual question briefly, 2 things internally. We have set our own, or we have committed ourselves to the Science Based Targets Initiative and to net zero. Other frameworks like Carbon Disclosure Project, EcoVadis, you name it. In value chain, we invest in reductions through renewable energy for our offices. We invest ourselves in sustainable aviation fuel. Beyond the value chain, we compensate for our own emissions from business travel every year without fail. And externally, we help our clients, similar to what Olivia just said, with a suite of solutions that includes tracking and reporting emissions from business travel, influencing choice at the point of sale, allowing travelers to choose a more sustainable option for travel, procuring green through carbon pricing, through strategic sourcing, beyond value chain carbon compensation for the residual emissions, and finally, and I think this is where there's much more to say around the fuel piece, we also want to help scale sustainable aviation fuel. We have launched one of the largest corporate SAF programs out there, allowing our corporate clients together with airline partners to invest in SAF for the emissions reductions associated. And I'll leave it there, I'm sure we can touch more on that.
Okay, great. Thank you, all of you. Now, so how can, we're looking at some different aspects of the travel industry. We're looking very much at corporate and we're looking at consumer as well, aviation and cruise. So how can people from the industry, travel and tourism, come together and collaborate to address the challenges and achieving net zero while still meeting this growing demand for travel? Because this is something that was discussed in the SAF panel yesterday as well. The demand and appetite for air travel, and I'm sure other forms of travel, is only set to grow, especially in markets like Asia, for instance, where it's absolutely going to be taking off appropriately. Lyndon, how can the industry work together to tackle this?
Yeah. I mean, our focus was for a long time just on our ships and the operations. I'm actually pleased to say that I've actually built up a really good, nice team now of sustainability analysts who can kind of deal with that. And it's allowing me to now spend more time looking at how we can work within the industry, working with industry groups and others to look at going beyond just the operation of our ship. And one of the main focuses for me now is really on the responsible tourism piece. And in particular, this growing appreciation and acceptance of the fact that there's biodiversity is very heavily linked with climate change. We as a travel and tourism industry can make such a massive contribution to protecting biodiversity, enhancing it. We can potentially have a very light footprint in the places that we go to but providing an income, so providing the economic support, but ensuring protection for just as one very simple example. One of the things we're doing is being able to track what our passengers want. If we go to places that allow that opportunity to interact with nature, and there's a lot of places we go to, trying to decentralise that tourism, going to these places, so that means we're not only reducing the kind of environmental impact of all going to the same places, which of course we don't want any more than anybody else, but we have to provide an education to our guests. And then we have these series of what we call protectors, which are ones with a low carbon footprint. We sold 50% more of those in 2023 than we did in 22. So we can see there's a growing demand to get out there in nature, to do things that involve more walking, kayaking, cycling. They're growing exponentially, the demand for those kind of excursions. So it's making sure that we can work together with the industry to look at these opportunities and these touch points beyond the operation of our ship. Once our guests leave the ship, what can we offer them that supports that responsible tourism? And as I said, ultimately helps with addressing climate change at a much broader level.
So there's definitely a demand from the consumer for more sustainable opportunities when it comes to travel. But again, I suppose the question is, how do you work together? Rather than looking at it on an individual basis, what can the industry do? How can you partner with other people within the travel and tourism? It might be like, for instance, on sustainable aviation fuel. Maybe you work with Nesta, who was on the panel yesterday. Olivia, what's your take on this? How can different stakeholders work together to achieve net zero?
So I think that travel and tourism is a network of businesses anyway. You don't get, Lyndon couldn't provide the great product that they provide at MSC without partnerships with the destinations that they visit. And so I think that naturally we are an industry that collaborates. I think that you mentioned the positive benefits of tourism on biodiversity. I think, there's also a much wider positive benefit that tourism can have on communities as well. So it's making sure that the right people are in the room at the destination level, I think that where you can really make sure that the positives are filtering through to the places that are benefiting from tourism. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of focus on aviation, and it is a real challenge. I mean, we all know that. But at the same time, the benefits that can be brought from tourism as well are really important. So we need to look at kind of how we ensure that we really are bringing the benefits to help us, and I can't think of a better word, but I use it advisedly, offset the impacts of air travel. And I think, you know, in our world, which is corporate travel, that connection with the destination is a little bit different. But when you look at meetings and events, which are really thriving at the moment, and you know, Nicole mentioned the impact that COVID had on our industry, and the resurgence of companies bringing people together, bringing their clients together is huge. And so there's a real opportunity to work with destinations on where those events happen, when they happen, outside of peak times, for example. And this is nothing new. This is a conversation we've been having for many, many years, about how you can actually bring the communities into those events, bring the benefits of those events out to the communities through all different kinds of ways. So I think we are naturally a collaborative industry, and we work together. I think that when you get the sort of authorities, be they national government, local government, together with the businesses and with the local people in the room together, then you can figure out what you need to focus on and how you can have these positive impacts.
Nicole, same to you. So who are you working with directly, and what do they bring that you can't do on your own? It's essential to have these partnerships, right?
Yeah. I'd start with three things I'd call out first on collaboration in general, and then I'll give you precise examples of how we collaborate, including with Olivia here on stage. So number one, I'd call out, if we want to collaborate, let's avoid incrementalism. Bear with me on this one, but Bloomberg Green just earlier this year published their global outlook, whereby outright climate change denial has gone down. Good news. But criticizing existing climate solutions has gone up and continues to go up. Now, I know I'm certainly not speaking to an audience of climate change deniers here, quite the very opposite. But it does send a message, and it does show that we have a tendency globally to get hung up in incrementalism. You know, let's not do anything until we know everything, when really we should be doing everything full stop. So when we talk about collaboration, as the private sector in general, we must lead, and we must, you know, maybe start small, scale fast, but bold action is required. Number two, bringing it closer to home to business travel. We must leverage the power of procurement. Business travel is a highly concentrated sector, and on some airline routes, business travel accounts for up to 75% of airline revenue. Let's use that power, if you like. Number three, we've heard this morning during the keynote about the intention action gap. The World Economic Forum just published their climate action gap report. 2 out of 5 priorities for corporations are about collaboration. One is about in-sector collaboration, creating coalitions, getting behind, you know, common commitments, for example, SBTI, net zero, raising the bar for our peers. And the second is about cross-industry partnerships to pool demand for low-carbon solutions, to lower the risk, bring the price premium down. You've literally got examples for both on stage. In industry, we already together are part of many working groups headed by the Global Business Travel Association, the industry body for business travel. They're currently working on a standardized criteria for sustainable sourcing in business travel, as an example. Amex GBT, we're also part of the World Economic Forum First Movers Coalition. That's a great example for cross-industry partnerships. There is a dedicated working group with the World Economic Forum looking at next generation fuels, which is also where Linden would come in, right? Because this doesn't just look at aviation, this also looks at generally hard to abate sectors that we can't easily electrify, basically. That's shipping, that's aviation. And our message is collaboratively should be to the governments of the world, hey, prioritize those sectors over others that are harder to decarbonize for those fuels. And that's what we can all do collaboratively today.
Okay, thank you. Now, Linden, you talked earlier about some quite astonishing figures in terms of the more efficiency that you have in the ships, just down to design. I think, was it like 40% over the last 10 years, something like that. Yeah. So what other like innovations or technologies do you see being implemented that can play a crucial role in achieving net zero? Aside from the design of the ships, which are clearly being made more efficient, yes. How else can you leverage technology?
Yeah, so the overall design, I think the other area that's fundamental is the source of power. So for us, internal combustion engines, used for many decades. What we're seeing now is ones with dual fuel capabilities, enabling that seamless transition to a different type of fuel. For example, we have now LNG vessels. We're seeing a lot of potential in LNG as the bio-LNG and the synthetic LNG is we hope going to become available. Certainly bio is going to become available, but we need to, again, the nature of the industry, and it's the same with aviation, you need to have these as drop-in fuels when they become available, because you may go to destinations where it's not available. And for us, it might be that the LNG isn't available, so we can still use marine gas oil, or we could use a bio oil or a biofuel, which is an alternative. So that gives us a lot of potential if we have those dual fuel engines. And we're actually now making sure that our future ships also are things like methanol ready. So we might have to do some engine configuration, but the pipes, the systems, the tanks and everything, because it's, you know, these things are very different. LNG needs to be stored at minus 150 degrees. Traditional fuel doesn't have to. So there's so many factors to take into account. And then one other nice technology that we're still not sure about its potential because it's only small scale right now. And even suppliers who come to us saying, yes, we can scale up, a year or two down the road, they're like, no, we didn't realise how complex it was going to be. It's fuel cells. Now, fuel cells are not batteries. They actually create energy, but using an electrochemical reaction as opposed to burning fuel that you do in a combustion engine. We've actually got a trial fuel cell on one of our ships right now. A lot of it is around internal education. Remember, we're dealing with technology people who've worked in shipping for many, many years, and this comes back to, you know, we want people in the industry who are forward-thinking, you know, and as well as educating those who are there. You know, people who've their entire careers, it's only been an internal combustion engine, getting them to think differently and getting these systems integrated. If we can if we can have that fuel cell scaled up and just at least meet the hotel capacity of the ship, which is actually around 50%, interestingly enough. I mean, these are big hotels on these ships. That means that even if we go to places where we can't plug into shore power, which is becoming much more readily available now, we could still be zero emissions in port, because to be ideal, though, these fuel cells need to run on something like hydrogen. We need to get rid of that carbon completely. It's then back to that hydrogen question. Is hydrogen going to be the fuel? So there's so many different moving parts. But actually, this improvement in the internal combustion engine, of course, efficiency is improving all the time. Ensuring that dual fuel capabilities, which give us that flexibility to start introducing fuels as it becomes available in a seamless way. Looking at technologies like fuel cells and also things like shore power. I mentioned that. I mean, we've been putting shore power capabilities on our ships since 2017. It was very frustrating because the plug-in deck was pristine until recently when it was only last year really we were able to start plugging in as ports got that capability. We've got a much better relationship now with the ports where we're able to give them information on how often our port calls are going to be in the future, because it's a huge investment for them as well. So getting their confidence that we are actually going to come to that port and we will actually plug in enables them to find the investment they need to make to do that. So I think that shore power plus new technologies to actually create the power on the ship, that's really a kind of the key kind of exciting area, I guess, for the industry and what's going to be this kind of step change, really.
Yeah, I get that fuel is absolutely essential to the whole decarbonisation and net zero, but are there other technologies that are being used or can be used to help achieve those goals as well? Anything that you're using or you're looking into?
So I think there's one element. We talk a lot about aviation and fuels and how we can decarbonise the use of the fuels, but I think there's the other area of aviation that's not always so talked about is radiative forcing, which contrails, which are the kind of white bits you see in the sky when a plane flies over, and the the impact of contrails can sometimes be double that of the burning of the fuel. So there's been a lot of work recently, particularly by Google and some of the airlines, on how they can leverage AI in terms of how an aircraft is flown in a way that minimises the impact of the contrails. And, you know, they've been really successful in that. And actually, if we can address that, that's a significant proportion of the carbon impact of a flight that can be addressed in that way. And then, you know, we talk a lot about the aviation, but also on the hotel side. I mean, there are the carbon impact of hotels is also quite significant. There are lots of new technologies coming in that can help hotels better manage their energy consumption. And little things, you know, Nicole talked about, you know, let's not wait until we know all the answers to everything or just focus on big things, but you can make a huge difference with things like smart thermostats in hotels. So we can really control the temperature, minimize the use of energy for air conditioning or heating, and smart ways of managing that across a hotel, which often has very different parts to it, the rooms, the banqueting, the conference centre, swimming pool, that kind of thing. So there's lots of things coming in that are really making a difference beyond the fuel side.
Nicole?
You've kind of thrown me overboard with the not fuel, but I'm going to try my best. I will probably also touch on fuels, but slightly differently. But first, to Olivia's point, I agree. Glad you said AI, contrails. That's something I'm really excited about. Other technologies I'm really excited about for travel net zero. I'm going to start with the basics, if you like. Renewable energy, right? Let's never forget renewable energy. If we just all sort out our Scope 2 emissions, electricity, associated emissions, then that would help us all. It would, significantly make Scope 3 emissions management easier, I'm going to say. So renewable energy, we need it to power everything. We also, by the way, need renewable energy if we eventually want to get to power-to-liquid fuels that are actually, powered by renewables. We need that to be green from beginning to end. We need it to be green hydrogen to then produce synthetic fuels in the future. So renewable energy underlying everything. Then I'm really excited, of course, about technology-based carbon removals. Until we get to technology-based carbon removals like direct air capture, though, in the meantime, we've got new nature-based solutions, for example, biochar, that I'm really excited about, which is almost a step advanced from your traditional forest preservation and tree planting, and it is more durable. It's a process whereby agricultural waste, forest residue absorbs carbon for the long, for more permanent than what a tree would do, for example. That's what I'm really excited about. And then coming back on SAF briefly, I do want to highlight, bringing it back to the fact, the reality is over 90% of our clients' collective carbon footprint from business travel comes from air travel. So I can't get away without talking about SAF. And SAF is not the silver bullet. If you look at the airline industry's net zero commitment, it is one of many tools in the toolbox, but it will account for the majority of the solution for net zero by 2050. But the reality is also, SAF today is less than 1% of all flights globally. And we need a significant step change to get to around 10% critical threshold of SAF globally by 2030. That's what we need for economic growth, basically. And to get there, we need to move away from what is today commonly used, which is HEFA SAF, SAF made from waste cooking oils and fatty oils. There are only so many McDonald's fries we can eat, and waste cooking oils isn't going to be the future. So we must move towards new technologies like alcohol to jet, municipal waste to jet. Great opportunity here in the UK, by the way, to use municipal waste for fuels. And then finally to get to that synthetic fuel space where we don't rely on anything but air and carbon, really, and hydrogen.
Do we have any questions from the audience? If you have any questions, please put your hand up and we'll try and get a microphone out to you. Oh, I see a few hands. Could we get a microphone out? If you just please state your name and where you're from, please.
Hi, I'm Manish Gupta. I'm from Avidon. I'm the digital tech business for sustainability. Question for the maritime is nuclear maybe a part of a solution as well?
Oh, I love talking about nuclear, thank you. I was on a panel about a year ago with 2 other cruise lines, and they asked the other 2 first about nuclear. I'm like, no, and I'm like, bring it on! I think we're at a point now with climate change that even the most hardened anti-nuclear parts of the community are now thinking, do we need to start looking at this? I think that's one point. I mean, I'm sure some people would still disagree that it's a solution. I think if we're going to start using it for cruises, then we need to start at least 10 years of advocacy and getting people to understand and change their mindset. Because I tell you, if we got a nuclear ship now, it wouldn't be allowed anywhere. We wouldn't be able to get it in any ports, and we probably wouldn't have any guests on board. There's something called molten salt reactors. These are multiple times different than what we're thinking in our heads of what nuclear means. All we think about is nuclear disasters. We think about old technologies. There's some really cool stuff. So if you ask me, yes, I would like my CEO to agree to start investing in at least the advocacy piece and really starting to develop some partnerships with key players who can really be on that journey with us, because I honestly think that's got to be part of the solution. Maybe more for the bulk carriers and the containerized cargo, to be honest, because they don't have any passengers. But I'd love to work for the first cruise line that had a nuclear ship, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, while we're weighing up nuclear cruises, is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question? I completely agree with you, by the way. The technology for these small modular reactors, and like I said, the molten salt reactors, it seems incredibly safe, and it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, really. It's like, lesser of two evils, if you like. So, yeah, I think it's something that needs to be explored. Our next question, please, if you can state your name and where you're from, please.
Of course. So I'm Athena, and I'm from the European Energy Exchange. And this question is very targeted towards Nicole, because we are one of your clients. And I'm very interested in SAF, actually. And the question is, how do you have conversations with clients on this, and how do you make it easier? As you can imagine, many of your clients are very big, and to make that procurement process simpler so that we can get on board.
Yes, great, thank you. Thank you for asking that question. We actually launched, I said earlier, we launched a corporate SAF program. What does that mean? How does it operate? Is basically your question. So we launched about 2 years ago with 1 million gallons of SAF to start with. That is roughly 15,000 one-way flights, London to New York, in terms of carbon emissions, average emissions. And we launched with that, and what we're doing in our program, we are aggregating the corporate demand for SAF from our clients, for example, from yourselves. We combine that with the purchasing power of airlines, who we also know want SAF. Both parties get to invest in SAF together, corporate and airline, okay? The corporate will get to claim the emissions reductions associated for your scope 3.6. The airline will get to claim it for their scope 1 direct emissions. In no way is that double accounting, that is dual accounting, because it's separate scopes, right? To make this manageable and easy for you, we're doing it based on book and claim. So I know you've had Neste here yesterday talking about that, I believe. But yeah, again, we're using book and claim, so we're decoupling the physical SAF from your investment. That means anyone can invest in SAF, even if the physical molecules of SAF are not readily available at your local airport in, I don't know, Southampton. Because likely molecules will not be available there because it's so supply constrained. So that's how we allow you to invest, even if the molecules are somewhere else in the world. What we don't want to end up doing is, because of your investment, shipping stuff from LAX to London Heathrow just so you can physically fly on it. We all share one big sky. The emissions reductions are the same. One additional point, to make this absolutely airtight, we are operating the program on a dedicated digital platform that is powered by blockchain technology. So here's another technology we haven't mentioned. So in that platform, you see exactly where in the world was my SAF injected, which airport, what's the feedstock certification, and what is your unique blockchain ID, so no one else can claim your investment. That's how it operates today.
Okay, thank you. Before we contemplate another question from the audience, I just want to sum up in a way. So in one sentence or two, tell me, what's the biggest challenge that you feel that we face in tourism reaching net zero? Lyndon, start with you.
With aviation, and arguably also cruise lines being two of the kind of harder to abate areas, I think it's really going to be about them finding the right fuels and the quantities of fuels they need in order to reach their net zero goals. I think arguably a lot of the other areas of the industry we're making some really great progress and we can develop partnerships for local destinations and everything else. But I think getting those fuels and getting that capability and having the right regulatory environment in place is going to be key.
Thank you. Olivia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One sentence, one word. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what it is. And I think that as a follow-on from that, getting the right government support to be able to invest in those fuels and stimulate investment is really important as well.
Glad you said government. So I'm going to say time, number one. Time is the biggest issue right now. Last year was the warmest year ever recorded. January was the warmest January ever recorded. February this year was the warmest February ever recorded, and so on. So clearly time is the biggest issue. And then two players, government. Yep, we need government to come on board more, to pull their weight, to create the right framework so that the private sector can take the risk and invest in these new solutions. And finally, the NGO community as well. Specifically, I'm talking about the Science Based Targets Initiative. And we need them, SBTi, to speed up some guidance on how we can use book and claim for SAF. That's essential for corporates to use that against their targets.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll take one more question. Amber, thank you. Please state your name and where you're from, please.
Hi, yeah, my name's Felicity. I work for Sweep. We're a carbon management and ESG reporting platform. Thank you for the discussion. It's been fascinating. I've learned so much. We've talked a lot about kind of technological solutions, and I wanted to talk a little bit, since we've got two experts on business travel in the room, about kind of company policy solutions. And since we've focused on aviation, there are alternatives in Europe. We don't have to fly by plane. But in terms of incentivizing people to change that behavior and to use trains or to use cars for those longer journeys, have you seen any companies who are introducing interesting policies which are making a big difference at the moment? And is there anything that we can do? I mean, business travel is something that happens across all businesses, all industries, right? And so it feels like somewhere that we can really make a difference.
There's a whole lot there. I'm sure we have both a whole lot to say on that. Well, I'll keep it short. We call that the point of sale, right? How can we influence behavior of the traveler at that point of sale? We always say that it starts with information is power. So number one, making carbon data visible, transparent, and granular. Moving away from calculations that just take into account the distance that you travel, and then maybe the class, going towards the actual maybe time that you spent up in the air, what kind of aircraft type was it, or any other carrier, right? Making that more granular and making it available at the point of sale. And then what's happening today, a travel policy might say, hey, wherever possible, wherever within financial remit that the company decides upon, always book the lowest carbon option. And we help the traveler to filter by the lowest carbon option. We also help them to filter by mode of transport. Where rail is available as alternative to air, it will show, and it will have a carbon efficient badge. And then one other thing, and then over to Olivia, is carbon pricing. We help clients add a fee to every ton of CO2 that they emit from travel. So for those travelers that look at this and carbon doesn't say anything, doesn't mean anything to them, we can also visualize that in monetary terms and then collect fees, use those fees to invest back in sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, there's that Nicole's talking very much about the traveller engagement side of things, and that's absolutely vital. But when you're talking about corporate travel, you also have the policy level as well, and what a company requires of its travellers. So there are certain things you can do to look at what the policy is and which class of travel, lowest emissions flights, although it's interesting to see the kind of, we're still at a point where we're evolving from the cost focus, and cost is still very much a focus on the policy side anyway. And then how you translate those policy decisions into what a traveller is able to or allowed to book.
Thank you for your questions. No, I'm sorry, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Don't have time. Obviously, our speakers will be here and around, I'm sure. If you have any questions for them, please do collar them. We do have a network break coming up now, so that's a great opportunity to do so. But for now, thank you so much, Lyndon, Olivia, and Nicole. Thank you.